listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and today I want to take you on a deep dive into a subject that impacts a lot of people, but that somehow we're reluctant to discuss openly. Now, I've titled the episode Unpacking the Emotional Lockbox. And yes, as you might have guessed it, I'm talking about what it is that we as men do with our emotional landscape. In other words, we sort of lock it up in a lot of ways. Now, in my research on all things masculine, psychotherapy, training, all sorts of stuff that I get into, I ran recently across a term that I hadn't run across, and I was a little surprised that I hadn't run across it, and that term is normative male alexithymia. It's a mouthful, right? But hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll understand what it means and why it's fundamentally crucial for us to talk about. And it's not just about talking about men and our challenge with expressing emotion. There's a bit more to it than that. So let's take this very mouthful of a label and let's explore what it is that we're talking about. So what exactly is normative male alexithymia? Well, in a nutshell, it's a term that describes the difficulty many men experience when it comes to identifying and talking about their emotions. Now, you got to remember that this isn't a clinically diagnosed condition like PTSD or generalized anxiety disorder. It's fundamentally more of a cultural and social phenomena. Normative male alexithymia is when society's expectations about being a man lead to emotional suppression or emotional illiteracy. So let me illustrate this a little bit. Consider John, and he's a husband and a father who basically struggles to say "I love you" to his family or to admit he's feeling stressed. Now, we can argue that social norms have led him into this state of emotional unawareness. So let me bring this into the context of Making Good Men Great and the model that I work with to help men move beyond this. So you all, from listening to my podcast, are probably aware of the issue that, as my patriarchal socialization takes hold, I become more territorial, I become more hierarchical, focused on status and prestige, more acquisitional and more competitive. So in order to conform to these values, this ideology, I also have to accept that there are certain consequences of that. One of which is dialing down my ability to empathize with others. But in doing so, I'm actually fundamentally also dialing down my capacity to empathize with myself. And one of the things that emerges with that is that my emotional vocabulary shrinks, or as I suggested earlier on, is either suppressed or I get to a point where I'm fundamentally emotionally illiterate. So in order to conform to my socialization, I'm basically putting my emotional being at risk. I reduce it. So my ability to actually face connection with others becomes significantly challenged and is significantly challenging. Because part of that is I can't appear vulnerable, so I can't really talk about my emotions. I can express anger, usually as a behaviour, but not necessarily verbally. Or I might shout, throw things, whatever it is. It's more of a behavioural thing, not so much talking about what it is that I'm feeling. Because if I acknowledge, yes, I'm angry, the question might need to be addressed, why am I angry and what might be underneath that anger? So let's take a little bit more of a look at the sort of socio-cultural roots. And as I said, this is an adherence, right? So normative male alexithymia is an adherence to the patriarchal ideology. And so being socialised in it, I conform to it. Now, society in that context is fundamentally patriarchal. Our culture is fundamentally patriarchal. And what our society mostly tells us, although we're challenging this step by step, is that it tells men to man up or stop being emotional. Now, very rarely is it expressed that explicitly, stop being emotional. It's more like, pull your socks up, man up, get over it. And over time, boys to men internalise these messages, thinking that emotional vulnerability equals weakness. So if I express what it is that I'm feeling, one is I'm weak, and secondly, I'm going to be pushed off my social perch, one that I've struggled and strained to carve out for myself. All right? One of the things that we know from primate research is that primates are prone to depression when they lose their position in the group. And so they eventually become sick and then die. So despite what a lot of people say about depression being a physiological, disorder, it's not quite like that. There are physiologies that are attached to the disorder, but depression is both a disorder of thinking, but also a displacement from your sense of social place. Very important to remember that. I've got a special announcement about how you can work with me. Since starting this podcast, I've had a lot of inquiries from listeners asking how they can work with me on a one-to-one basis. Now, I've finally managed to free up some time to work with about 5 clients privately. Typically, we'll work together for 6 months, applying the ideas I discuss here to help you lead a fulfilled, meaningful, and happy life, and a well-rounded life. If that's something you'd be interested in, drop me an email at gunter@goodmengreat.com and we'll be in touch. There was a Dr. Sarah Roberts, a sociologist, who points out that these emotional norms begin in childhood and often persist in adulthood, affecting relationships, careers, and even health. No kidding. So this particular form of emotional stoicism actually doesn't do anyone any favours. Now, the problem is that when boys grow up in a patriarchal family where the father conforms strongly to the patriarchal norm, the boys actually grow up to be more patriarchal than the dad. So you can sort of see where this is going. We're fostering more and more emotional suppression and potential emotional illiteracy. And it's a really disturbing picture. And I think about this in the context of today's hypermasculinity, which is the backlash to men finding a better place within a more gender equal society. And again, this on the surface makes no sense at all. Why should we fear gender equality? Well, because we don't like being vulnerable. We don't like not being top dog, which is what, patriarchy tells us we need to strive to. So, that again, we come back to that whole concept of the alpha male. And, part of being an alpha male is, apart from the fact that you're generally arrogant, if we take that term literally, i.e. alpha male, but we're also fundamentally emotionally unexpressive unless it's in a form of seduction, manipulation, or dominance and control. Okay, so we use language that we find might work in that context. So, this has some major ramifications. So what are the consequences of this? Well, there's a significant fallout for normative male alexithymia, which, by the way, came out of psychiatry. I just thought I'd mention that. The inability to express emotion isn't just an individual problem. As I've hinted just earlier, it has a ripple effect. Mentally, it can lead to increased stress and even undiagnosed mental health conditions, but also cultural, social, family dynamics that are fundamentally not healthy. Now, let's tap into the physicality of this. Believe it or not, emotional suppression has been linked to cardiovascular problems and a weakened immune system. And in relationships, this emotional distance creates a wall that can lead to misunderstandings, dissatisfaction, and in severe cases, divorce. And interestingly enough, divorce is on the increase. So, this has a pervasive impact. It also means that one of the issues that we have is that men continue to be, to a point, reluctant to expose themselves, firstly to other men, and then secondly in therapy. Okay, so you're probably asking, well, how do we break the mold? What do we do? Now, the good news fundamentally is that we can break this mold. And in my model, I talk about deconstructing patriarchy and beginning a journey of personal growth wherein I begin to change my relationship with myself that doesn't rely on the patriarchal ideology. It actually comes from something else, a better set of values. Okay? Now, if I put it in a nutshell, right, the first step is that we need to begin to foster emotional intelligence, both individually and as a society. Psychotherapist Dr. Mark Green suggests strategies like emotional intelligence training or even cognitive behavioural therapy as starting points. Now, for those of you at home, without going into therapy, try journaling your emotions or speaking openly with trusted family members or friends. And for the loved ones of men who are struggling with this, give them a safe space to help them to express themselves emotionally. Now, in my experience, a large part of this is actually bringing men in touch with, firstly, their body, and then how they label the awareness that they have of these sensations with an emotional vocabulary. And for me, this has been probably the most successful way of helping men to become more open to their emotional inner world. Right? It's, to be able to sit quietly and experience your body and the sensations with that, and what this level of tension might mean emotionally. Can I put a word to this? Right? So it's not a quick fix. It takes some time, it takes some practice, but it's certainly worthwhile doing because, if you're going to be better in yourself, then you're going to be better with others, and your world becomes, has greater depth and, better colour. It's a bit like, going from a black and white TV to a high definition 5K screen. So, there are questions that I sometimes get asked by women, especially, women in relationships and marriages, where they ask, how can I help my husband open up emotionally? And one of the most important things I think about this is that you need to be able to provide a non-judgmental space for your partner to step into, and being able to acknowledge and validate what he's feeling, even when it seems to be, as simple as, I just feel really bad. This is the point where you don't unload on him how bad you are feeling, but it's the point where you engage with some empathy and you acknowledge and validate what he's feeling, and then try to help explore that. Where is that coming from? What's it about? And active listening at this stage of the relationship is fundamentally important, because men very quickly shut down. If they get a sense that you're not cool with what he's feeling, or that your feelings are more important than his, he's going to shut down. And with that shut down, you ultimately risk the demise of your relationship. Now, it's not going to be, bed of roses for him either. And in fact, a lot of men become sensitive to rejection and abandonment, not because they might have had it as a child, but because they've tried several relationships wherein the same thing repeats. Now, some men defend against that by going, it's all her fault, while other men will begin to go, there must be something wrong with me for all these women to have left me. Okay, so some very important food for thought, and I'm going to wrap this episode today. I hope that this particular conversation has enlightened and encouraged you to challenge those sort of patriarchal ideologies that we carry on with, the social norms that aren't serving us well. Remember, making good men great is about deconstructing patriarchy, and by helping men to enrich their personal and relationship experience, to be more present, to be more intimate, to be more self-aware, and ultimately to be more resilient. So join me next week as we'll tackle another topic aimed at inspiring positive change in our lives. So this is me, Gunter, signing off, and I hope that you'll subscribe and join me on our collective journey to being better than what we are. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.